October 4, 1943. Reich Air Ministry, Berlin. Inside the oak-lined conference chamber of the Reich Air Ministry, a heavy silence fell over the room as Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring addressed a gathering of Germany's top aircraft manufacturers. Stenographers meticulously recorded his words, which would later stand as one of the most consequential misjudgments in military history. The Americans cannot construct airplanes. They excel at refrigerators and razor blades, but not at aircraft, Göring declared. Outside the tall windows, the skyline of Berlin was streaked with smoke rising from factories frantically working to replace the Luftwaffe's mounting losses. Despite the recent setbacks in Stalingrad and North Africa, the Third Reich still maintained control over the majority of continental Europe. Yet Göring's perspective, anchored in impressions from the 1920s, led him to underestimate the industrial potential of the United States, viewing it as a nation of jazz musicians and consumer goods manufacturers, rather than a formidable military power. Unknown to Göring, American shipyards were at that very moment producing 3 Liberty ships daily. By the conclusion of his meeting, the Richmond shipyards alone would have completed an additional vessel. Within half a year, those same Americans, whom Göring assumed incapable of large-scale aircraft production, would be executing massive bomber raids over German cities while their shipyards launched a new cargo ship every 8 hours. The eventual defeat of Germany was being determined not on the battlefield, but through industrial output, a metric that would expose the critical miscalculation at the core of Nazi strategic planning. Göring's dismissal of American industrial ability was not a sudden judgment of 1943. It had long roots in German military thought. As a celebrated World War I fighter pilot who had shot down 22 Allied planes, Göring had witnessed firsthand the United States' delayed and modest involvement in that earlier conflict. American forces had entered World War I with almost no air fleet and were dependent on French and British aircraft. This experience cemented Göring's erroneous belief that Americans lacked the capacity to produce modern warplanes at scale. The oft-quoted remark about American aircraft became Göring's habitual response whenever asked about U.S. military potential. He reiterated similar statements throughout the early years of World War II. In 1940, following the fall of France, he assured Adolf Hitler, "The Americans can make fine cars and household appliances, but that does not mean they can build planes. They are bluffing, and they are remarkably skilled at bluffing." Göring's underestimation was not merely personal, it reflected a systemic flaw in German intelligence assessments. In November 1941, Josef Bayo Schmidt, chief of Luftwaffe intelligence, produced a report estimating that U.S. aircraft production would not exceed 400 planes per month. His analysis argued that American factories lacked both the precision machinery and the skilled workforce required for sustained military output. Similarly, German naval intelligence held a disparaging view of American shipbuilding capacity. In January 1942, a report from Kapitanel to Admiral Ryder concluded that American shipyards might produce only a single cargo vessel per week. He added that American workers were pampered, accustomed to generous pay and limited hours, and lacked the rigorous discipline of German craftsmen. These assessments collectively underestimated the United States' industrial mobilization potential, contributing directly to strategic miscalculations that would have catastrophic consequences for the Third Reich. Even though Hitler often downplayed the threat publicly, he privately recognized the urgency, warning his generals in December 1941 that a rapid defeat of the Soviet Union was essential. Only after neutralizing Russia could Germany confront the United States before its industrial output became insurmountable. Meanwhile, Hermann Göring, responsible for evaluating enemy air capabilities, clung to his belief that America's industrial potential was overrated. Despite his repeated dismissals, the United States was quietly transforming into what President Franklin Roosevelt famously called the arsenal of democracy. On January 6, 1942, during his State of the Union address, Roosevelt set forth extraordinary production objectives.
He announced a plan to dramatically increase aircraft production, targeting 60,000 planes in 1942 alone, with the goal of reaching 125,000 planes the following year, including 100,000 combat aircraft. German intelligence intercepted these figures. Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda minister, noted in his diary 2 days later, "The Fuhrer laughed when I presented Roosevelt's production numbers. Pure propaganda. Even achieving a fraction of that would be miraculous."
What German observers failed to comprehend was that the United States had been laying the groundwork since 1940. Preparation had not come through military orders alone, but was catalyzed by British financial support. The British Purchasing Commission, urgently seeking to replace ships lost to U-boats, approached American industrialist Henry J. Kaiser with an unprecedented proposal: construct 60 cargo ships using mass production methods that had never been applied to shipbuilding. Kaiser, who had never built a ship but had successfully overseen the Hoover Dam project, embraced the challenge. His approach would ultimately reshape not just ship construction, but the broader concept of wartime manufacturing. Kaiser rejected traditional, artisanal shipbuilding methods. Instead of relying on a small team of skilled shipwrights crafting each vessel by hand, he implemented prefabrication, welding instead of riveting, and assembly line strategies adapted from the automobile industry. The Liberty ship itself was intentionally uncomplicated. A 441-foot cargo vessel modeled on an older British design, powered by a straightforward triple-expansion steam engine that could be maintained by any competent mechanic. When German intelligence recovered technical schematics from a torpedoed Liberty ship in early 1942, they underestimated its potential, labeling the design primitive. Corvette Captain Peter Cromer described it dismissively as coffins, slow, ungainly, and sailing like bricks. Yet the true genius of the Liberty ship lay in its simplicity. Every component was standardized, and each section prefabricated in factories across the United States before being transported to 18 shipyards, where they were assembled like enormous three-dimensional puzzles. Workers, many of whom had never seen a ship before, quickly surpassed the production speed of experienced German shipwrights. The inaugural Liberty ship, the SS Patrick Henry, was launched on September 27, 1941, after 244 days of construction. German naval intelligence initially interpreted this output as modest. At that pace, they estimated the Americans could only produce about 50 ships annually. They failed to notice the rapid acceleration. The second ship took 180 days, the 10th 105 days, and by January 1942, average construction had fallen to 70 days. Henry Kaiser then set an ambitious goal that German analysts dismissed as impossible propaganda: build a ship in just 10 days. By September 1942, at the Oregon Shipbuilding Corporation in Portland, Oregon, as German U-boats celebrated a second happy time by sinking tens of thousands of tons of Allied shipping, Kaiser's workforce laid the keel of the SS Joseph N. Teal at precisely 12:01 a.m. on September 13th. What followed resembled a meticulously orchestrated industrial operation, with 3 shifts of workers laboring continuously while massive cranes positioned prefabricated sections weighing up to 250 tons. This operation demonstrated how industrial innovation and efficient organization could convert sheer labor into an extraordinary wartime advantage, catching German planners entirely off guard. In a remarkable wartime transformation, thousands of American workers, many of them women who had never touched a welding torch 6 months prior, produced miles of flawless welds. These newly skilled laborers came from all walks of life. Homemakers, farmers, and retail clerks were suddenly shipbuilders, trained rapidly to meet the urgent demands of wartime production. Among these pioneers was Janet Doyle, better known in the yard as Wendy the Welder, a former waitress who quickly rose to become one of the fastest welders on site.
Alongside her worked Tom Washington, an African-American ex-sharecropper from Alabama who had mastered the art of ship fitting, and Miguel Santos, a Mexican-American welder whose speed rivaled that of German standards.
On September 23 at 4:30 p.m., the SS Joseph N. Teal slid into the Columbia River, just 10 days after its keel had been laid. In Berlin, German intelligence initially dismissed the reports as exaggeration. Admiral Karl Donitz told his officers, "Even if true, this must be a publicity stunt. They cannot sustain production at this pace." Yet Henry J. Kaiser, the visionary behind these yards, was undeterred, confidently asserting, "We can do it even faster." By November 8, 1942, at Richmond Shipyard No. 2 in California, the construction of the SS Robert E. Peary marked a new benchmark in industrial efficiency. Hundreds of prefabricated sections, meticulously prepared and tested in workshops throughout the yard, awaited assembly in precise order. The ship, in effect, had been built before construction even began, allowing workers to perform what amounted to a massive, coordinated speed build. Kaiser selected his top craftsmen for this ambitious project. Catherine Glasscock, formerly a schoolteacher, welded at a staggering 35 feet per hour, a pace rarely achieved even by skilled German welders. Richmond Jones, a former African-American sharecropper, operated the main crane with exceptional accuracy, positioning 250-ton sections within mere inches of their designated locations. 19-year-old Mary Piloseno, an Italian-American, led the electrical team tasked with wiring 5 miles of cable in less than 20 hours. Hour by hour, the ship took shape at a speed that defied conventional expectations. Within 6 hours, the bottom hull plates were welded. By 18 hours, the side shells were in place. By the end of the first day, the ship's outline was already clearly visible. Prefabricated deckhouses, fully outfitted with plumbing and electrical systems, were lifted into position. On the second day, a single crane lift accomplished what would have taken a German yard a full week. By day 3, the 2,500 horsepower triple expansion steam engine, weighing 140 tons and pre-assembled in Toledo, was lowered into its berth, installed in hours by accompanying engineers. On November 12 at 3:30 p.m., the SS Robert E. Peary was successfully launched, a mere 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes after keel laying, with a displacement of 14,245 tons, requiring only minor finishing before entering service. The extraordinary speed of these American shipyards soon reached German authorities. Reconnaissance flights conducted by long-range FW-200 Condor aircraft returned images that initially appeared unbelievable. Multiple Liberty ships under construction simultaneously in single yards. By December 1942, German intelligence officer Hedman Wilhelmus reported having identified over 200 vessels being built, noting that U.S. shipbuilding capacity exceeded prior estimates tenfold. His report was suppressed, and Luftwaffe leadership remained skeptical. Göring insisted the photos were misleading, claiming the Americans were using camera angles to simulate greater production than was occurring. However, the operational realities quickly confirmed the threat. Captain Klaus Buten of U-521 observed in January 1943 that convoy HX-222 consisted of 47 newly constructed merchant vessels of standardized design, clearly mass-produced. By then, 18 American shipyards were actively building Liberty ships. At the Bethlehem Fairfield Shipyard in Baltimore, 47,000 workers launched a ship every 4 days. The California Shipbuilding Corporation completed a ship every 5 days. Many of the workers had never seen the ocean before, yet they consistently outpaced experienced. By March 1943, the pace had reached staggering proportions. 3 Liberty ships were launched daily. To counter this output, German command calculated that they would need to sink 1.3 million tons of shipping each month just to keep pace.
Each Liberty ship required roughly 250,000 individual components, including 30,000 precisely fabricated steel plates for the hull alone. The combination of prefabrication, coordinated assembly, and extraordinary workforce dedication rendered previously unimaginable production levels routine, fundamentally altering the balance of maritime logistics in the Atlantic. By mid-1943, American shipyards had achieved a level of production that defied prior expectations. The construction of a single ship involved the installation of 25 miles of electrical wiring, 3,500 feet of piping, 2,500 valves, and nearly 350 miles of welded joints. Remarkably, these complex vessels were being assembled in just 42 days on average, demonstrating unprecedented efficiency in industrial manufacturing. The workforce behind this achievement directly challenged Nazi assumptions about race and gender. Of the 650,000 Americans employed in shipbuilding, roughly 200,000 were women, famously known as Rosie the Riveters, whose technical proficiency proved that industrial skill was not confined by gender. African Americans, whom Nazi ideology regarded as inferior, operated cranes, performed welding, and completed tasks that consistently met or exceeded German standards. At the Richmond shipyards of Kaiser alone, fully integrated crews, prohibited under Nazi racial laws, were producing a new ship every 51 hours by May 1943. The composition of these crews reflected extraordinary diversity. Chinese-American welders worked alongside Norwegian immigrants, Native American riveters from New Mexico collaborated with Jewish refugees from Germany, Mexican-American women supervised teams that included impoverished white workers from Appalachia. This coalition, dismissed by Nazi ideology as incapable, was outproducing the so-called master race by margins that could hardly be calculated. Meanwhile, reports reached Hitler in East Prussia during May 1943, at the height of what became known as Black May. Admiral Donat informed him that U-boat losses were mounting. 41 German submarines had been sunk while only 50 Allied merchant ships were lost. American shipyards were outpacing the destruction capabilities of the German Navy. Donat detailed that the Americans had launched 140 merchant ships in the previous month alone, a rate that promised to replace all shipping losses since 1939, well before year's end. Hitler turned to Hermann Göring, visibly frustrated. He reminded him that American industry was once dismissed as capable only of producing consumer goods. Göring attempted to downplay the issue, suggesting that American ships were of inferior quality and would not withstand rough seas. But Hitler interrupted sharply, dismissing German intelligence as ineffective, emphasizing that American production figures were irrefutable.
By this point, the quantitative superiority of American industry was undeniable. Factories in the United States were producing 8,000 aircraft per month, compared with Germany's 2,000. Despite the efforts of Albert Speer. American tank production exceeded 2,000 per month. German factories managed only 500. Liberty ships were just the most visible evidence of a far-reaching industrial power that Germany could not match. In October 1943, Göring publicly questioned the reported American production rates, insisting that quality must be lacking even if the numbers were accurate. Yet German pilots were providing contrary evidence. P-51 Mustangs and P-47 Thunderbolts outperformed German fighters, while B-17 and B-24 bombers appeared in formations numbering in the thousands, systematically striking German cities. General Adolf Galland confronted Göring privately, presenting captured data indicating that the Americans were producing 54 heavy bombers each week, more than Germany had fighters in total. Göring retreated to his hunting estate, Karenhall, seeking solace in art stolen from across Europe, yet the reality of American industrial might was inescapable. German submarine crews experienced the impact of this production directly. Captain Lieutenant Heinz Schaefer of U-977 reported that by late 1943, Allied convoys had grown enormous, often consisting of 80 to 100 ships, most newly built in American yards. The submarines could at best sink 1 or 2 ships per convoy, insufficient to slow the tide.
Similarly, Commander Herbert Vera of U-415 observed that Liberty ships approached in continuous formations, uniform in appearance, and bearing the hallmarks of mass production, including welded seams and standardized equipment. For U-boat crews, the fight was no longer against individual ships, but against an industrial system capable of replacing losses faster than they could inflict them. The psychological effects were profound. American radio broadcasts celebrated each ship launch like sports victories, and German submarine crews eventually stopped tracking the losses, overwhelmed by the relentless pace. By January 1944, these production statistics themselves became a tool of psychological warfare, further undermining morale among the German forces. By 1943, German intelligence could only monitor from a distance as the United States rapidly increased its maritime and military production. That year alone saw the completion of 1,238 Liberty ships, the construction of 203 enhanced Victory-class cargo vessels, 122 tankers, and 367 military ships. Shipyards achieved peak productivity in December, launching 155 merchant vessels in a single month. Meanwhile, American factories delivered 8,789 aircraft, finished 2,464 tanks, and manufactured 153,000 military trucks. In February 1944, Wilhelm Sangen, head of the Reich Association of German Industry, presented an alarming report to Adolf Hitler. According to his figures, American annual production dwarfed Germany's, 100,000 aircraft compared to Germany's 25,000. 50,000 tanks versus 19,000, 2.5 million military vehicles against 100,000, and 2,500 merchant vessels compared to just 200. He warned that such an imbalance was unsustainable for Germany for even a single additional year. Hitler reportedly dismissed the report angrily, branding it defeatist propaganda. Yet Sangen's numbers were cautious. In reality, American output in 1944 surpassed even these projections.
Confirmation came from Germany's allies in Japan. Commander Toshikazu Omi, serving as Assistant Naval Attaché in Berlin, sent a coded communication to Tokyo in March 1944. He reported that German leadership persistently underestimated American industrial capabilities. According to his intelligence, the U.S. had launched 173 ships in February alone, a figure German officials refused to accept. Omi cautioned that this misjudgment posed serious strategic risks and recommended that the Imperial Japanese Navy assume American production could be at least double what Germany believed. The Japanese military had long recognized the implications of American industry. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, before the attack on Pearl Harbor, had predicted, "I can achieve initial success for 6 months, but beyond that, I have no hope of winning." Yamamoto understood what Hermann Göring never grasped. Once mobilized, American industrial power was almost limitless from any opponent's perspective. The scale of this production became undeniably visible on June 6, 1944, during the Normandy landings. D-Day presented German defenders with an armada that defied comprehension. A total of 6,939 vessels participated in the operation, including hundreds of Liberty ships packed with supplies, vehicles, and munitions. General Lieutenant Wilhelm Richter, commander of the 716th Infantry Division, described the scene. The sea appeared black with ships. They extended to the horizon in every direction. This is not an invasion, it is a migration. Each Liberty ship represented 42 days of continuous American industrial labor. Each tank arriving on the beaches was one of the 88,410 the United States would produce over the course of the war. Every Jeep was one of 639,245 built in American factories. Even the landing craft, numbering in the thousands, had been produced in inland facilities such as Evansville, Indiana, and Quincy, Illinois, by workers with no direct experience of the ocean.
Oberleutnant Ernst Goeth, defending Sword Beach, later recounted that the German forces had been told American soldiers were weak and their equipment inferior. Yet he observed U.S. engineers constructing a floating harbor in just 5 days, trucks surmounting beach obstacles with ease, and fighter planes dominating the skies. Even as American bombing raids devastated Berlin in February 1945, Hermann Göring remained in denial. He claimed that reported American production figures were exaggerated, suggesting that many ships were merely wooden decoys for propaganda. His deputy, General Karl Kirch, recorded in his notes that the Reichsmarschall lived in fantasy. After 1,000 bombers struck London, Göring insisted that such numbers of aircraft could not exist. When confronted with serial numbers from downed bombers proving at least 15,000 B-24s and B-17s had been built, Göring accused his officers of defeatism. The reality was even more striking. By the war's end, the United States had produced 31,213 heavy bombers, 18,482 B-24 Liberators, and 12,731 B-17 Flying Fortresses. This single category alone outnumbered Germany's total aircraft production during the entire conflict. When U.S. forces captured the Reich Air Ministry in May 1945, they discovered a trove of intelligence reports meticulously detailing American capacity. Each report had been stamped unreliable or dismissed as enemy propaganda by Göring. One June 1943 report noted that a Panama shipyard, visible from neutral waters, was simultaneously constructing 17 Liberty ships, with a predicted completion of one every 3 days. Göring had written in the margins, "Impossible, agent compromised or insane." Another report, from December 1943, announced the completion of the 1,000th Liberty ship. Göring dismissed it as propaganda, estimating that fewer than 200 ships were actually finished.
Major William Hutchinson, reviewing the documents after the war, remarked on the staggering nature of German self-deception. Accurate intelligence had been ignored simply because it conflicted with preconceived racial theories and assumptions about American capabilities. At the Nuremberg trials in 1946, Göring was confronted with definitive production figures: 2,710 Liberty ships, 531 Victory ships, 296,429 aircraft, 88,410 tanks, and 2,383,311 military trucks. Göring's response underscored his mindset. These figures reflect quantity, not quality. We Germans valued quality above all. During the Nuremberg trials, prosecutor Robert Jackson presented a 1944 German document offered by Hermann Göring's own staff. This report explicitly acknowledged that American aircraft outperformed German planes across all critical measures: speed, operational range, armament, and reliability. In private sessions with psychiatrist Dr. Gustav Gilbert, Göring initially remained tight-lipped. Eventually, he conceded, "I misjudged the Americans. I assumed their comfort and prosperity made them weak. When I claimed they were only capable of producing consumer goods, I truly believed it. That error cost us dearly. Their industrial output completely overwhelmed us." German underestimation of U.S. military potential had catastrophic consequences. Admiral Donitz persisted with the U-boat campaign even after it became mathematically futile. Out of roughly 40,000 men serving in the U-boat fleet, 28,000 perished, a staggering 70% casualty rate, the highest suffered by any military branch of any nation in the war. These sailors died attempting to sink ships faster than they could be replaced. Meanwhile, the Luftwaffe, relying on Göring's assurances about the limits of American aircraft production, continued aggressive operations long past the point where defense would have been a rational choice. The outcome? Over 433,000 Luftwaffe personnel lost their lives confronting an enemy capable of producing 50 planes for every single German aircraft. The numbers speak for themselves.
Germany constructed 1,162 U-boats during the war. These submarines sank nearly 3,000 Allied vessels, including 175 warships and 2,825 merchant ships. Yet the Allies produced 5,777 merchant vessels, meaning that for every ship the Germans sank, 2 were being added to the fleet. This wasn't luck, it was the result of industrial capacity and workforce mobilization. Behind the Liberty ships were 18 million Americans engaged in war production, exceeding Germany's entire armed forces. The Richmond shipyards alone employed 93,000 workers at peak, surpassing all of Germany's shipbuilding personnel combined. This workforce shattered Nazi racial and social preconceptions. Mexican-American welder Emma Martinez at Todd Houston Shipbuilding completed 300 feet of precise welds per shift, outpacing most German welders. Dorothy Luck, an Oakland homemaker, operated cranes lifting 250 tons. Thomas Washington, an African-American former sharecropper from Alabama, became a shipfitter whose craftsmanship exceeded German standards. American production facilities incorporated innovations impossible under Nazi rule, racially integrated cafeterias in defiance of local segregation laws, childcare centers for working mothers, and on-site medical clinics providing free health care. Workers earned $1.20 per hour, more than a German skilled laborer made in an entire day. They invested surplus income in war bonds, while German laborers faced execution for any slowdown. Americans willingly worked overtime, motivated by both pay and pride, whereas German industry increasingly relied on coerced labor from occupied territories, often sabotaged by the workers themselves. American teenagers continued their education, while German youths were conscripted for anti-aircraft units. Factory workers were encouraged to suggest improvements, accelerating production, while German laborers risked execution merely for pointing out inefficiencies. The Liberty ship program embodied technological ingenuity that Germany could not replicate. Welding replaced riveting, reducing both construction time by approximately 30% and ship weight by 600 tons. Lincoln Electric Company developed techniques so advanced that captured German engineers described them as inconceivable without practical demonstration. Prefabrication reached unprecedented levels, with entire deck houses fully equipped with plumbing, electrical systems, and furnishings constructed far from shipyards, transported by specialized rail cars, and lifted by 250-ton cranes, 5 times the capacity of Germany's largest cranes. Henry Kaiser introduced assembly line methods where each worker focused on a narrow set of tasks, such as welding the same type of joint for months. This specialization enabled speed and precision far beyond traditional approaches. New workers with no prior shipbuilding experience in July could by December outperform veteran German shipbuilders. Every Liberty ship relied on materials sourced nationwide, delivered with unparalleled accuracy. Steel plates from Pittsburgh arrived exactly when required. Engines from Toledo were shipped fully tested and ready for installation. Electrical generators from Schenectady appeared on schedule without delay. The coordination and integration of production logistics demonstrated an industrial sophistication that Germany could neither match nor fully comprehend. The American railroad network was a cornerstone of the nation's wartime logistical achievement, enabling the transport of immense volumes of materiel. In 1943 alone, the Pennsylvania Railroad moved 50 million tons of supplies, surpassing the throughput of Germany's entire rail system, despite the latter's reliance on forced labor. Remarkably, this logistical feat occurred without interrupting civilian passenger services. Major Hans Keel, a German logistics officer who studied U.S. wartime production after the conflict, noted the disparity. We struggled to equip individual factories. The Americans were supplying entire sectors. We tracked individual boxcars. They tracked entire trains. Our planning horizons were weeks. Theirs spanned years. Even as Liberty ships were being launched in remarkable numbers, American engineers continued refining their designs. The Victory ship, introduced in 1944, was faster, larger, and more advanced. Yet its construction time averaged just 42 days, only slightly longer than the Liberty ships. This program exemplified the United States' ability to innovate at scale. New turbine engines replaced older, less efficient systems. Hull designs were optimized for speed and cargo capacity. Ventilation was improved to protect supplies, and navigational systems were upgraded, all implemented without slowing the production rate. In contrast, Germany's attempts to modernize their submarine fleet, particularly with the Type 21 U-boat, resulted in chaos. Only 4 of these submarines were operational by the end of the war. Meanwhile, America produced 531 Victory ships in just 18 months. The economic realities made Hermann Göring's dismissal of U.S. industrial potential fundamentally flawed. In 1941, American GDP stood at $126 billion compared to Germany's $35 billion. U.S. steel output reached 80 million tons, 4 times Germany's 20 million tons. The United States generated 26 billion kilowatt-hours of electricity versus Germany's 8 billion. While American production surged 170% during the war, German output increased only 30%, despite Albert Speer's desperate interventions. By 1944, U.S. wartime spending reached $90 billion annually, exceeding Germany's pre-war GDP. The Liberty ship program alone cost $4.6 billion, more than Germany spent on its entire U-boat fleet. Post-war analyses confirmed the vast imbalance. Dr. Ralph Wagenfor, head of Germany's Wartime Statistics Office, calculated that the U.S. outproduced Germany 6-fold in raw materials, 8-fold in finished goods, and 12-fold in transport capacity. As he summarized, "We were not defeated in battle, we were overwhelmed by industrial output." American production had itself become a strategic weapon. Propaganda broadcasts from the Office of War Information conveyed this reality directly to German troops. They were warned that the U.S. was producing a ship every 8 hours, a plane every 5 minutes, and a tank every 7 minutes. Initially dismissed as exaggeration, these claims were confirmed when German forces faced them on the battlefield. Helmut Roma, defending Normandy, recounted that the promised 10,000 planes seemed absurd until the sky filled with aircraft. In practice, Liberty ships came to symbolize the invincibility of American industrial capacity. German attempts to ridicule these vessels as ugly ducklings did not deceive crews who witnessed their sheer numbers. One captured submariner during interrogation admitted that when convoys of 50, 60, 70 ships arrived, it became clear the war was lost. Numbers do not lie, even when politicians do. After the war, U.S. investigators questioned German industrial leaders about their perceptions of American production. The consensus condemned Göring's judgment. Fritz Thyssen, a steel magnate who had supported Hitler's rise, remarked that Göring lived in fantasy. His 1920s visit to America revealed only nightclubs, never the steel mills or auto factories. That ignorance cost Germany the war. Albert Speer was even more critical, asserting that Göring's dismissal of American industrial capacity bordered on criminal negligence. By the time I assumed control of armaments, it was too late. Americans produced monthly what required us a full year. Even Alfred Krupp, whose factories epitomized German industry, acknowledged that our steel was superior but produced in artisan quantities. Americans created substantial, high-quality steel on an industrial scale.
A single Liberty ship contained enough steel to construct 50 Tiger tanks. With 2,710 Liberty ships built, compared to Germany's 1,347 Tiger tanks, the arithmetic alone demonstrates the disparity. Even the Soviet Union, despite being an ally, was astounded by American output.
Marshal Georgy Zhukov recalled that the United States supplied 400,000 trucks, 13,000 tanks, 15,000 aircraft, and 17 million tons of equipment, but it was the Liberty ships that ensured delivery under constant threat in Arctic waters. Nikita Khrushchev, overseeing Ukrainian industrial production, noted that without American trucks, artillery could not move. Without American steel, tanks could not be built. Without American food, armies could not be sustained. Every supply, from boots to telephone wire, depended on these ships. Göring's underestimation of U.S. industry gave Germany a strategic disadvantage, enabling both Allied fronts to benefit from American resources. Soviet Admiral Nikolai Kuznetsov added that losses in Arctic convoys were inevitable, yet for every ship sunk, 3 more were produced. Germany could destroy individual vessels, but the United States produced them in volumes sufficient to overwhelm any losses. The stark numerical superiority of American production ultimately rendered German miscalculations catastrophic. During World War II, the United States undertook an unprecedented maritime construction program, producing 2,710 Liberty ships across 18 shipyards. By 1943, the average time to complete a vessel had been reduced to just 42 days, with the record for the fastest assembly standing at an astonishing 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. Collectively, these ships represented a staggering 29,292,000 tons of cargo capacity, with each vessel costing an average of $1.8 million. In total, the U.S. constructed 5,777 merchant ships of all types, accounting for 56 million deadweight tons, surpassing the combined output of every other nation involved in the conflict. The workforce behind this monumental effort reached a peak of 1.7 million, with women comprising 35%, roughly 600,000, and African Americans accounting for 14%, or approximately 250,000 workers. Average wages stood at $120 per hour. The scale of U.S. wartime production extended far beyond ships. Comparisons with German output revealed the immense disparity: 296,429 aircraft to Germany's 111,767, 88,410 tanks versus 67,429, over 2.38 million trucks compared to 350,000, 257,390 artillery pieces against 159,147, nearly 2.68 million machine guns versus 1.1 million, and 41 billion rounds of ammunition compared to 8 billion. The U-boat threat was formidable, yet German submarines constructed 1,162 vessels and destroyed 785 Allied ships. Despite this, Allied shipbuilding reached 5,777 ships, creating a net gain of nearly 3,000 vessels, ensuring the continued flow of men, equipment, and supplies across the Atlantic. The Liberty ship program's significance extended far beyond wartime logistics. It became a model for social progress, with integrated shipyards, albeit limited by local regulations, demonstrating the potential for broader civil rights advancements after the war. Women proved their industrial competence on a permanent scale, fundamentally reshaping the American labor force.
Kaiser's innovative healthcare model for workers evolved into Kaiser Permanente, now serving over 12 million Americans. The construction techniques pioneered in the Liberty ship program, welding replacing riveting, prefabrication, and assembly line production, set new global standards in shipbuilding. Post-war, these methods influenced Japanese and Korean shipyards, which later exceeded U.S. production by refining these American innovations. Perhaps most crucially, the program illustrated that democratic nations could mobilize human and material resources more effectively than totalitarian states, that voluntary labor could outperform forced labor, and that diversity was a source of strength rather than weakness.
This vindicated President Roosevelt's vision of America as the arsenal of democracy. At Nuremberg, Hermann Göring awaited his execution. Despite maintaining his composure, he could not ignore the overwhelming evidence of American industrial capacity. On October 15, 1946, just 2 hours before his scheduled execution, Göring ingested cyanide, ending his life. Dr. Gustav Gilbert, the prison psychiatrist, recorded Göring's final admission regarding American production. A nation capable of erecting the Empire State Building in 410 days could indeed produce almost anything. Göring acknowledged that Liberty ships symbolized a defeat of Nazi assumptions about U.S. industrial weakness. 2 Liberty ships, the SS John W. Brown and SS Jeremiah O'Brien, still survive today, serving as living monuments to one of history's most remarkable industrial achievements. When they pass the Statue of Liberty on commemorative cruises, their whistles echo over waters once patrolled by German U-boats, reminding observers of a time when democratic societies were tested by those who doubted their strength. Commander Edward Ellsberg, who supervised salvage operations at Normandy, emphasized the ship's critical role. Although modest in design and slow in speed, their sheer numbers allowed them to transport everything from Sherman tanks to medical supplies, ammunition, and food. They connected American production directly to combat operations. Göring had assumed Americans were limited to producing consumer goods. In reality, they manufactured whatever the war demanded, including victory itself. The 2,710 Liberty ships stand as enduring symbols of the danger of underestimating democracy. They demonstrate that prejudice and misconceptions about industrial capacity can result in catastrophic strategic misjudgments. While Nazi leaders clung to fantasies about American weakness, the American workforce proved that creativity, organization, and collective effort could outmatch even the most efficient totalitarian regimes. Liberty ships were not merely cargo vessels. They were floating proof that freedom, when effectively mobilized, could decisively outproduce tyranny. Their legacy underscores a timeless truth. Wars are won as much in factories as on battlefields, and dismissing industrial capability in favor of ideology is perilous beyond measure.